Hola, I'm Claudia Romo Edelman.
And I'm Cynthia Kleinbaum Milner.
And this is a podcast a la Latina.
The Playbook to Succeed, being your authentic self.
Today, Ana Corrales, amazing leader.
She's the COO at Google for devices and services.
And we're going to have 3 main things that you're going to learn from this incredible podcast.
The first one is how you can climb the ladder by process of elimination. This means having jobs you may not like, but making sure you always leave them better than you found them. Never burn bridges.
Number 2, embrace feedback that hurts. Take what is useful for your growth and disregard the rest, like Ana did when she was told to be a little less.
And the third one is, remember that we can't live life backwards, but you can make sure to identify your true calling early on. She did it by identifying what gave her energy.
And all of that and more here in the podcast A la Latina.
Stick around.
Hola! Welcome to a new episode of the podcast A la Latina.
The Playbook to Succeed, being your authentic self.
Today, we're absolutely excited. We have a stellar guest, Ana Corrales.
She's the COO of Google Devices and Services.
And we're so happy to have you here today.
Thank you so much. I'm super excited to be here.
Excellent.
So what does the COO of Google Devices and Services do?
I work in the part of Google that makes consumer hardware. So I'll just show you because it's easier. So, this is our new phone that we just actually released yesterday in New York. So super excited to be in New York with you guys. Great
From
event.
Latina.
Yeah, exactly. We do headphones and Fitbit, Nest products. So I hope many of you have our products in your home. And we spend a lot of time making them for people to love them and use them every day. So that's what I do.
I wasn't ready, but here's my ad. Product placement.
I love it.
This is great.
So that's basically what you're leading all devices of Google?
So my manager, Rick Osterloh, leads the entire devices and services, and I run all of operations for that. So that includes, managing our development process, managing all of our supply chain, customer support, IT, like sort of end-to-end, kind of making sure that it all comes together. So launch time is kind of, our biggest moment of the year because everything we've been working for 18 months, 12 months really has to come together for people to be able to get their devices on hand. And, we actually have a couple of stores here in New York. So people just want to go after the launch and buy their thing. And so many things need to come together to make that happen. And my team is responsible for ensuring that all comes together.
I just have to say, you just boosted my ego big time because you're here the day after launch. This is like
looking fabulous.
Looking fabulous, but also
I don't know about that, but
also all roads lead to you. We've been talking for many, many years to different companies, and you're the most senior Latina in Google and probably in STEM, in the entire tech industry. So it's fantastic to have you with us. Tell us more about you, your upbringing, what led you to be who you are today and what you do today?
Well, I'm originally from Costa Rica, so Central America. I grew up there my whole life. And I think how I ended up here, I always joke that you should live life backwards because you would have so much more insights about things that you should have seen earlier in your career that you were probably too busy to pay attention to it. But I think for me, my parents are both we're both scientists. My dad was an engineer. He passed a few years ago. And my mom is a PhD in botany. So, they were really STEM people. And I think we sort of inherited that love for science and for math. It's something that was a huge part of, of what we did. And then when I was probably 15 or 16, because Costa Rica is such a small country, at that time, they show you how to try to be an entrepreneur because it's unlikely you're going to end up working in a big multinational company. And so I was elected to do that. And they taught us how to sort of run little companies. And I was nominated to be the GM for my little company. And we made scrunchies, which, as you all know, in Latin America, they're very popular.
And everybody
has oh, yeah. Oh, for sure. They're so fun. Everybody has long hair. And so basically, we created that. And my mom really liked sewing. She had all these fabrics that were free. So for those who are in finance, that's free COGS, right? So free material is always a great thing. And the grandmas were willing to help us because they, love helping little girls. And so that was free labor. So our margins were amazing. And, we ended up running this thing. And then we were supposed to shut it down about 6 months later. But we were having so much fun. And we were making, frankly, a lot of money for teenagers, especially in Latin America. So we kept we kept it going, and then we kept it going for years. And I sold it, when I came to study in the U.S., and we did this deal with like the national supermarket, and it was great. You could see your product when you went to the supermarket. It was amazing. So you would have thought, super obvious. I love product. I should have known that at that moment. Didn't have a clue. Just was like, oh, that was fun. On to college. And I was, intimidated by coming to college in the U.S. It's a big step for sure. But it took me many years later, probably a good decade later, to really realize I love products. I love doing things. I love creating. I studied engineering, but I just, all these connections didn't really happen until much later. So, yeah, it's a little bit about me and Costa Rica.
You're talking about this idea that you've introduced in other podcasts or in other interviews about finding your calling by process of elimination.
Oh, yeah.
Right? So you're saying you should have known that you loved product when you had your business with scrunchies. How did that process of elimination feel?
Yeah.
And I'm asking you this because I've found myself many times in jobs that I don't like. And I bet you a lot of our listeners are feeling the same way.
For sure.
Sometimes you're like, I made this mistake. Why am I in this role? How do I get out of this? What can I learn from this one that will position me for a different role? So if you can help our audience have a playbook when they find themselves in a job that they don't love, to take the next role that will get them closer to their calling.
Yeah, no, I think that's great. I think the basis for me is that I really love learning. I mean, to be honest, I was, pretty nerdy then. I'm still pretty nerdy now. I mean, so I just love any new topic. I will just go into it and go deeply into it. And I think that was the genesis of me changing roles a lot, was I would do something, I'd learn it, I'd hopefully contribute, and then I wanted to learn something new and learn it and contribute. And the reason I say it was process of elimination is that I would go into these roles, and exactly like you're saying, sometimes you would love it, and sometimes you would be like, wow, this is really not for me. But I think you need to be, the advice I would have for people if you're in that situation, one, be really honest about it. Like, you have to be brave enough to say, I don't like this, I want to make a change. But it's also important that you have a responsibility. You took that role, you need to leave the place better than you found it, and you need to contribute. I don't think it's okay for you to just jump from lily pad to lily pad and not really give back to anything. It's super important that you learn. You have to be open to the fact that you may not know everything. You very likely won't, and you have to go there and learn. And actually, I've had jobs where I didn't think I liked them, probably because I didn't know what I was doing. Then I learned, over time, and then I actually started to like it more. So you have to give it a bit of a chance. But I would just say it takes courage to change jobs. It's disruptive in your, in your daily life, in your routine. If you have a family, it's disruptive. And I think you have to be super comfortable with saying, I'm going to be uncomfortable. And when people say that, like, hey, go be uncomfortable, I think you hear it, but you don't really absorb what it means. It means you're gonna really not feel great. You're gonna really be disruptive. And so you need to be able to have the courage to do that. And what I see is that people they really react instead of being, proactive. They wait until the manager has the conversation like, look, I don't think you like it, or look, I don't think this is working out. When in reality, you probably knew that long time ago. And so if there's one skill that I think I had to learn for myself, I'm such a busybody, I love what I do, love being busy, it was to slow down and have the white space, which is still a challenge for me today. And I try really hard to do that, because when you do that, you will be able to hear yourself better and say, actually, I don't like this job. And make that conclusion.
We've heard from almost every one of our previous guests that careers are long.
Yes.
And when you're in a job that you don't like, you're like, this is going to destroy my career.
Yes, it won't. It will not. It definitely, and I think that's I think you bring up a super point. It doesn't. And I think people will look at how you exit a place, whether it's a huge success or sort of a medium success or not a great success, but they will always remember how you ended up leaving a role. And if you're in a role that you don't like and you leave it in a very graceful way and you leave it in a way that you've contributed back, right? They made an investment in you, you need to give back, but you're also making a decision, a very conscious decision to move forward. I think there'll be a lot of respect for that, and you'll end up learning something. May not be what you want to do for your career, but you'll learn something. And careers are, they were long before, they're now longer.
Yeah.
So don't worry about that. It's definitely not gonna decide anything in your career?
You know, I have a personal example of that. At some point, I didn't know what I wanted to do when I left consulting. I was working at BCG.
Yeah.
And you know what happens after consulting? You're like, I'm burned out. I need to just take a break. And I ended up working with my dad, who has a textile trading company. And I was going to Asia, to the factories.
Yeah.
And every time I was on a plane, I was like, what am I doing? Why am I doing this? This is not marketing. This is not what I love. My next job, I got it because I knew how to source private label brands. I worked at Guild Group, and they were launching their private label. And I had 90% of my job was something else, but the 10% of private label, I knew it because I worked with my dad before. So you may not see it while you're working on it, but if you can learn something, you can use it later.
100%. And how many of us have gotten jobs off the 10%?
Yeah,
a lot.
Exactly.
You know, and I hope that there's many more, because I think as Latinas, we tend to aim actually for the 90%. I see this at work all the time. They're like, there's 10 requirements. I have all 10. But, you know, I think I should also have 11 and 12. And do you think I should apply even though you were like 12 out of 10, you know? Yeah. And I think people need to get much better, especially Latinas, much better at saying, like, I'm just going to go for it. I mean, to be honest, guys just go for it. Just being honest that they do. And you see that when you're interviewing them. They're like, I know nothing about this, but here's why I'm going to be awesome. And then you have the next candidate who says, I know everything about this, but I'm really nervous.
Yeah.
So it's really interesting to see.
You talk about
And the data indicates that man, 90% unmatched with a job, and nevertheless they go. So with 10%, they feel like, I can swing this.
Lower than that.
Women is like 50%. Latinas is really high. Unless you feel that you're a 90% competency, which is like a real difference with men, then you don't go. We do impose that imposter syndrome a lot more. But I want to go back to, we've heard that careers are long, and a lot of people had taken lateral moves or even backward moves in order to learn the operations of a business. Even if it was so scary, and for Latinas, that is almost unheard of, because we don't have the luxury of the salary, downgrade and so on. But it seems that knowing the operations of the place where you are more than that 10%. Even if it's that, it's going to leapfrog you in a bigger way.
I'm a huge believer, and maybe this is because I've worked in, multiple startups and also, bigger corporations, and I've been really fortunate to work in some great places. But I'm a huge believer. You need to understand what business you're in, and you need to understand how that business is running and how that business is succeeding or not succeeding, and what are the metrics that matter, and how are you going to make, your product and company better. And you don't do that by being sort of surface level understanding. And that's why they say, and I'm super biased, right? I'm an operator. There's many people who are, and so that's our bias. But I think if you really truly know, how do you bring an idea? How do you start with something that says, hey, I have, idea for this project, and how do you actually make it from there to something physical or a software or a service that you really are going to deliver, and then what's all the go-to-market to that, and really sort of end-to-end understanding of that, I think it makes you so much better. I think the other benefit of doing that at some point in your career, and earlier is better, by the way, I would say, is that you then get to say, ooh, I like this piece, but not much that piece, and I like that other piece much better. So for example, for me, I'm an engineer, but, I did enough tours of, different roles that I ended up really liking finance. Like, I think it's such fun, and they can be really influential, and there's so much to learn there. I was really humbled by how many different disciplines there are in finance. I would have never known that had I not rotated into that role. So, I think you get to understand deeply how to make your business successful, and whether you're passionate about that business or not. And so I do think going, into the operations and understanding it makes a big difference for sure.
And earlier is better.
Yeah.
In a personal note, I am thinking about this a lot because it took me this amount of years to come to the realization of that. But when I remember my father God bless him, he was never intended to, like to put me into that position. But he did two things. One, he told me what a great co-pilot I was. Because I always went in the highways. He was an engineer, so he was always taking me from Mexico to Acapulco and to Ixtapa, and I was like the origami.
My dad was an engineer too.
Exactly. I feel like, what a great co-pilot you are. And only 5 years ago, I saw my resume and I was like, I've been the right hand of someone my entire life.
Yes.
Without any intention, he gave me that piece. And it took me a real effort to become the pilot or even try to become a pilot. So how do you discover that?
Yeah.
If you're a young Latina, how do you have that moment? What is the trick?
I think I have two tricks. But again, this is after, I wish I would have had these. I didn't. I think one of them, looking back now, is, and you maybe can see this too, whatever is easy for you, like you don't really tend to count it as much because you don't even notice because it's sort of easy for you. So for example, for you, being able to rally people and, being loud and getting people excited and giving energy, giving all that energy probably gave you energy, but you didn't sort of realize that because it was effortless. So I think what's super important is as a person to sit back and say, in those quiet moments, saying, what gives me energy and what doesn't give me energy? Like I love, for example, being in product reviews and, in some boards I sit in, we do product reviews there too. And I've realized it almost doesn't matter what product it is. It's just so cool to be there in that creation process and making it real and making it possible.
And touching it with your hands.
Exactly.
Like, look at this.
Isn't it so pretty? Yeah, exactly. So I love that. But I didn't realize that gave me so much energy. There's other activities I need to do that I can do and I work at it. But when I leave that activity, I'm exhausted. Like I'm so tired. And so I now realize noticing where your energy just naturally goes up and where your energy naturally goes down gives you a really good indication where you like spending your time. It doesn't mean you can't do one thing. It just means you're spending energy when you do that. So I think that's one big piece. I think the second big piece is to sort of write down how you're feeling about these roles. Because at least for me, when I write something down, like this bothered me or this made me really happy, and then I sort of look at it over time, maybe over a 6-month period or something, I feel like it gives me insights that I normally, because we're too busy, everybody, let's go. You're so busy, you don't really get to see those insights. And for me, there's something about just putting it on paper, it really comes together for me, and it's giving me insights that I didn't really know. In fact, that's one of the reasons I decided to leave one of the roles I had and go to a startup was I just sort of realized, this is a trend for me, and I don't know that I would have had, perhaps the insight to realize there was a trend. It's sort of the boiling frog syndrome, right? But when you write it down, you sort of see these data points that are unrefutable, said by an engineer, of course. Yeah. I'm like, give me the data points. Okay, the conclusion is, but that's what happens to me personally. But I think the majority for me is the energy. Like I can just tell when
El termómetro.
Yeah, when we had the launch of a Latina here, we had a cocktail party and we spoke. And after I spoke, my husband approached me and he said, like, you were a different person. I feel like this is what you were born to do. And I'm like, cocktail party is great.
But you know what? I will tell you, let's pick on the cocktail party. Cocktail parties are one of the ones that I can do. I'll have fun. But the second I leave that door, it's like somebody sapped me of all energy. I don't know why. Like, I'm a social person. I like people. But I
wasn't talking about cocktail party. I was talking about like Latinas, empowering Latinas. Yeah,
but you know what I mean? But these are examples of things that, that's a skill, frankly, to be able to, talk to people and get people. And, it's just that networking. And I realized for me that networking is actual work versus if I am in a product discussion, that's zero work. So it's just interesting to see where that energy comes from.
You said you love product and nevertheless you came to the US instead of leading that and you came to the traditional route of academia. Tell us more about that.
Yeah, well, first of all, my parents were both academics, so there was no chance that I was going to be like, I've decided I'm an entrepreneur and I'm just like going to skip college. They were like, oh no, I'm a master's, and they were like, okay, that's kind of acceptable. It's not a PhD, but okay, that's acceptable. So definitely college was in the cards for us. And I think my parents, I was super fortunate. They wanted to give us an education outside of Costa Rica because they felt Costa Rica, was a very small country at that time. So it still is, and very limited in opportunity. So I think they really wanted us to experience just how broad the world really is and how broad the opportunities really were. I think the one thing that they did very well for us was they just had no limit on, I think they allowed us to dream big. I mean, I just don't really think they had anything like, you should be this or you should be that or don't do that, don't do this. And huge credit to my dad. My dad, grew up in Costa Rica, very traditional person. And so to send, there's 4 of us, my sister, my brother, me, and my little brother, but to send his 2 daughters, I mean, you guys know the culture, to a different country when they're 18 was like not normal. I think it was a big exception for him. And I knew that. Yeah, so I came to the US to study. I should have known I wanted to study engineering, but I didn't. I ended up just kind of going to school, figuring out what I liked, didn't like, did kind of math, econ, because I was good at numbers. And then I took a class that was sort of a little bit into product design. And so I decided I really liked that. And that's why I decided to grad school in engineering. So that's how I ended up choosing my degrees. But it should have been so obvious. And I would have taken probably different classes if I had had the moment to listen to myself, but I just didn't. So
maybe you wouldn't be here. You wouldn't be as successful. So
you never know. Yeah, you never know.
So let's go back to your first job, Cisco. You were there for 9 years and you got promoted 7 times. I think I'm not great at math, but that's a lot.
Yeah. Well, actually, Cisco was not my first job. My first job was HP. But yes, I went to Cisco very early on. I was super fortunate to go to Cisco when Cisco was just, like a rocket, right? It was just growing so much. And I think that's one thing, people look at my career and they think there's some magic sauce that I have. I'm sorry, but that's just not the case, right? I think I'm a hard worker and I definitely want to do things, but I was also super fortunate to be in the right place at the right time. And Cisco was growing a lot. I think the other thing that I would highlight about my journey in Cisco are 2. One is this love of learning. I was so young, I just wanted to learn. So I would do a job and then the person I was working with, I'm like, oh, what do you do? And that's interesting, let me go do that job next. And so then I just, without realizing, was trying to understand that end to end. And that's how I ended up in so many different functions because what does engineering do? What does finance do? What does operations do? I didn't really hit all the way to marketing, but I ended up, doing a lot of rotations on that. And I think what happened is that allowed me, after a while, to basically do big startup efforts within the company where there was like a massive problem. They don't even really know how to articulate the problem. Like, spill in aisle 4, and they're like, send a SWAT team to aisle 4 and see what's going on in aisle 4. And I was like part of that SWAT team. So I always say I was running towards the building that was on fire instead of running away from the building that was on fire. And I think that's one of the reasons I ended up getting, a lot of opportunities because I would, deal with these very difficult, ambiguous things and be able to sort of make sense of it and structure it and be able to then manage it in a way that it could exist long term and hand it off to somebody else. And then I'd go do the next spill in, aisle 7. So that was an interesting thing. And then the second thing I would highlight in my tour at Cisco, I was incredibly, better lucky than good. I had the super good fortune of having 2 incredible mentors there who really believed in me. I didn't work for them directly. I just did, in one case, I did a project for the person and they just sort of really took me under their wing. And in the second one, it was the person ended up being COO of Cisco. And when he was earlier in his career, I was in his organization, but not directly reporting to him. And I was doing one of these big, crazy projects. And, I think after that was successful, they really invested themselves in my career. And those mentors have made a huge difference. They're still mentors of me today. I can call them and in literally under a minute, they know me so well. They can just say like this advice or that advice or yell at me if they think I'm out of line, which they do. And in 5 seconds, they can just like read you, I feel. So they've been incredible people that I admire.
Long-term mentors.
Long-term mentors, they still do it. Like I will still call them. I'm like, hey, I have this issue. I don't work at Cisco anymore. They don't either. But I'm struggling with X, Y, and Z. And they're like, okay, tell me the scoop. And so I'll tell them, whatever the problem might be. And they'll just give me incredible advice in like under 5 minutes. It's really impressive.
It sounds like they were your sponsors and now they're your mentors. When you were
That's
at
true.
Cisco,
You're right.
They were your sponsors.
You're right.
What she mentioned about running towards the fire to projects that are ambiguous and difficult, we've heard from other guests that Latinas, like just growing up in Latin America, gives you a sense of like, I have to fix it. Like there's always like
totally.
right?
So unshakable.
Yeah.
Yes.
And like you can navigate conflict easier because it's always
there.
on.
It's always on.
That's one of the things that we want to tell corporations. Like Latinos are more comfortable with ambiguity.
Yeah.
We are not shaken by a
messiness.
little problem. Exactly. We go and fix it and
navigate change pretty well. We can, we're going to do like...
Yes. Yeah, I definitely think so. And I think it helped me actually to be loud, to be very gregarious and get people excited. And, just you got to have your team believe that it's possible. And I think that's super important. They see the leader. If the leader thinks it's possible, they're going to go run that hill, But if they see a leader that's shaky or uncomfortable, it's a lot harder. Yeah. And so I think having that conviction of like, oh, no, this is not happening in my house and we're going to fix it. We're going to fix it right now. Like that was so motivating, I think, for the whole team. And it was a blast, too. I mean, we just created such fun memories. So yeah, it was really a great time for sure.
You mentioned your mentors as being crucial in your being able to be comfortable and going to the house where there was fire. Probably those mentors, like your parents, encourage you to dream big. We've also heard from other guests that they are not running to the house of fire, but trying to solve the big agenda items of someone else and over volunteering. And I think that I heard a lot.
There's good and bad on that, yeah. Yeah, no, I definitely think, first of all, I do want to just say one thing on the mentors and sponsors because you triggered that thought for me. I think they were first mentors, became sponsors, then mentors again. Because it's hard for somebody to be your sponsor without knowing you. They have to know that you are a person that works hard, that has integrity, that, really wants the right thing. And that's they want to sponsor that type of leadership. And then eventually they sort of give you the sponsorship. So I just want to highlight that. They also don't look like me. So I think if I had waited for, a female Latinx leader to take me under their wing, I mean, I would still be sitting.
Waiting,
I'd still be waiting. So I think it's super important that they look generally nothing like you. Somebody that helped me a lot was a salesperson that, I didn't meet a first salesperson until I was like 30 because I came from a STEM background, right? And they think so differently than I did. Mm-hmm. And so that was super helpful. They look nothing like you generally, and they generally have different backgrounds, and that's really helpful. And then to your point on the over-volunteering and overdoing that has gotten me both huge advantages and also in trouble, right? Because earlier in my career, and I'm hoping that I'm better at this now, I would, you're with your peers, you think it's like a big Latin family, right? So your brother, you're like, hey, I work mostly with men, right? So it's like, he's your brother. So you're like, hey, you missed a spot, do this, do that. And that shockingly gets annoying to them. Of course, I didn't think so, right? I'm like, I'm helping you. Like, there's a pothole right there. You're about to run into it. And so I had to sort of realize when over-volunteering is helpful and when over-volunteering is not helpful. But what is true is that when there is an issue and there's a problem, the problem doesn't necessitate people looking at it and admiring it and describing it perfectly. They need somebody who's going to go fix it. And I think it's super important as a leader. You can see that in your own team. You have an issue. You have 10 people on your team. There's going to be, 5 who are like, oh my God, that's really bad. That train wreck looks bad. There's maybe 2 that are like, I could maybe help, but I'm like waiting to be asked. Mm-hmm. And then there's like 1 or 2 who are going to be like, this is my idea, this is my proposal. So I think there's a huge difference between admiring a problem and proposing a solution. And the more you propose and the more you actually help, people are going to notice that because it's that initiative of saying, not under my watch, not happening under my watch. And so I think that's really important for people to see. If you're sitting there and you're like, I have this idea, I think I could do it, and you're thinking in your head, nobody else can hear what's happening here. You actually have to say, I have an idea and I can help and I have a proposal. You have to sort of move instead of just sitting there thinking and analyzing or overanalyzing, which is probably what you're doing at that time.
Would love to know a little bit more of being a Latina in STEM, in tech. the highest ranked in your company, probably of the entire industry, or
I don't
the
know about that,
highest
but maybe.
No. What has been an advantage for you of being a Latina to get you there? And what has been a disadvantage? Where had you had pains, bruises, dial downs, and how did you fix them?
I think that's a great question, and I definitely have had both. I would say for me, it's been by far an advantage more than a disadvantage. I'll talk about the bruises because there are some, and we'll definitely talk about those. But I would say for me, what has been just the energy, the positive, like you have positive energy, you're super energetic, people are excited. You're a happy person. I mean, let's be honest, right? You just put music, you're like, it's not that bad. Let's, like nothing music can't fix.
We love music.
Yeah, exactly.
We need music
We
here.
do it. But, I think just getting people excited and to believe that something that's very hard is possible. And I think also, frankly, for me, when I became a mom, family is a really important part of our culture. I think people understand and respect that, and it made me a better leader. So I think overall, by miles, people will feel super comfortable coming and telling me things. They'll tell me their life story. That's one of the funny things people say about me. And it just happened the other day. I was getting my haircut. This lady told me her life story, and at the end, she's like, I have never done that. I don't even know what happened. I don't even know what happened. Yeah, I trust you, and I don't know why, but I just trusted you. And I felt really, really privileged that she had done that, actually. It created sort of a different bond. So I think it has allowed me to create these really genuine bonds because I do care, and that's sort of our culture. And also, like you guys said, we don't really mind a mess because generally speaking, there's a lot of mess, right, in how we sort of grew up. So I think it's been an overwhelming positive thing for me. I think the bruises have come exactly what you said. Hey, can you please speak less? Like number of times.
You've been told that?
Oh, yeah, for sure. Yeah. So can you just be like a little less? And it's really interesting. When I was first told that, I was so insulted. I was just like, I can't believe, do you say this to other people? Do you say this to my colleagues? And so it's interesting in that I was very offended, but at the same time, there was a bit of feedback that was real that could have made me more effective. So I think when you get feedback that hurts, it's been my experience that generally speaking, you're going to have to figure out which part of the feedback you're going to really take in and would be actually beneficial, and it's actually an evolution of you as a leader without giving up your genuineness, and what part of the feedback that you're like, you know what, thanks, but I disagree with you. Respectfully, I disagree with you, and I'm not going to change who I am at the core. And if that means I don't fit in here, then I'll just go somewhere else, including making my own thing. But it is the one that hurt the most at that time for me. There was feedback, and it was around, it was around, I think they said it the wrong way, and I don't appreciate the way it was said, but I think the feedback was helpful in that I was basically it was like the peer thing, right? Like, let's make sure that everybody has a voice. Let's make sure you pass it around, pass the opportunity around. And we just get excited. So we're like, oh, and this and that and da-da-da. And they're like, okay, too much.
Be a little less.
Yeah. I think they could have done it 1,000 times better, but there was some feedback there that was real. And it was more like share the oxygen, maybe, let's just say it that way. And that was a real feedback, but I just wish they would have done it in a much nicer, professional way. But
there is a stereotype, I think, that particularly for Latinas, to please try to be a little less.
Yes.
And how do you deal with that and yet succeed? How do you not kill so much of yourself that you can still be yourself and use it to your advantage?
Because I think especially as we get older, I think you know who you are. Part of the thing that they're telling you to dial down is the thing that makes you very successful too. And so I think you just need to be genuine, but you can be genuine and still continue to become a better leader and a better person. And so I think the option of saying, well, they said it in an awful way, and so I'm going to just be hurt forever, and I don't need to change because the way that it was said was awful, is a bit of a cop-out because in a way, telling you that feedback is hard for people to tell you that. Nobody likes giving feedback, let's be honest, right? Especially a real one. So, whether it was good intent or bad intent, how it was said, is there something out there that you should listen to? And I think for me, the bar that you're asking for, the bar is like, do I still feel like I'm who I am and my genuine self? And if so, proceed. But I have learned, and I'm sure there's things I can learn to be much more effective today. I'm much better today. And you have to be humble enough to do that. I mean, if you look at professional athletes, I'm always so impressed. I love their stories because they're like at these crazy top of their game, but they're always learning. They're always practicing. They're always making themselves better. And talk about tough feedback, right? You don't have a good game one day, you're out. And that doesn't happen in my industry, at least, I don't.
God.
Thank God, right? And so I'm like, how do they do that? And they're so humble in that. And I think there's a lot to be respected about that. And there's a lot to be learned about that. But yeah, I mean, have I been told things that were absolutely bruising? 100%.
You said something, Ana, that we haven't heard before, Claudia, and it really resonated. I think we have to maybe include it in the list
Decálogo.
or in the list of things that Latinas are great at least because I've heard it from others, the trust. I've heard for many, many years from people that when I ask them something and they open up to me and then they tell me, I had never said this to anyone.
I know.
There's something about how I ask the question. It's almost the reason why I was like, maybe I should start a podcast because I have this ability to get people comfortable to
people
open
talking.
up.
Yeah.
And I didn't realize it was a Latina characteristic. So maybe that's one of the things that we have to flip the script to.
And it's also with humanity. I think the way that it's asked or there's care, people can
no
sense
judgment.
that. No judgment. They can sense that you care and that you're not
Leading like a
judging.
mother.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah,
Leading
exactly.
like a mother.
Yeah.
You take people within, you care,
Yes.
you're not going to let anyone behind. If you live like a mother, then you're going to create trustworthy relationships, strong teams, bonding, where people are going to go against the wall.
Right. Yeah. And they definitely will. Right. And I think, and it comes in all teams, right? That's, your leaders, your peers, your own team, they all have to trust you. And that trust is slightly different. But at the end of the day, the decisions will move with the speed of trust. They definitely will move at the speed of trust. And so whatever trust you have is how much faster you and more successful you can make some of these really tough decisions.
I want to talk about the industry STEM, but just to finish on identity, what are the biggest misconceptions or stereotypes that you find for Hispanics, particularly in tech, but in corporate America in general?
I mean, I would say one of them is what we've been talking about, which is that there's this feeling that they're, loud and happy and and it's just can we just sort of dial it down? And the feeling is that you can't that if you give this feedback, you're gonna, the flower is just gonna, die, if you will. I feel like we're really tough and we can take feedback. And
we
so
can do hard things.
And we can do hard things. And so I feel like these are not shrinkling violets. If you have feedback that's gonna make somebody more effective, please tell them. And I think you will find that they're extremely resilient, more resilient than I think we get credit for. And they want to grow, and they want to make a career, and they want to move forward. And so they're waiting for that. Can you do it in a kinder way? Absolutely. But whatever it is, give the feedback because there's a lot more resiliency than I think people give credit for. And I think, I feel like people tippy-toe around a little bit too much. And it's just I think we're so used to the Latin culture and parents are like, mijita, da, 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 so you're just used to that. So
compliment, criticize, all of them one.
Exactly. But I love you.
I love you.
So anyway, I think that's the thing would be is you could say, hey, here's some real 3 pieces of feedback, but I love you, So, and I think that would go a lot better than this tippy-toeing that's happening.
Pieces of data. Number 1. According to a book that we're quoting a lot here, grit. What Latinos have is grit.
Yeah.
You can shake the entire thing. We're going to be standing there. What we need is 2 things when you're a mentor. Number 1 is to know the rules of the game. Someone that turns on the light.
Yeah.
Number 2, that they tell you, but I think that you can get there. And number 2, and that's a data point that comes from google.org many years ago, is that the barriers for Latinos to get into tech were, number 1, access to education, but number 2, encouragement. No one told them. No one told them, I can see you like Ana Corrales leading Google. How do we do that?
This is an incredible question, and I spent a lot of time on this because I'm actually one of the executive sponsors of OLA, which is our Latinx ERG. And some of the data you shared, I see it. I see that every day. I think it's so important for us to get early access to education. There is like that digital divide, and making sure that we're, Google has a ton of programs to try to do that. And we're working on like doing startup efforts and making, training accessible to everybody with our tools. And it makes a huge difference because they need to know that it exists. They need to know it's a possibility. I'll tell you one quick story because, I was once asked, hey, why have you done, Ola at Google and Conexión at Cisco and all these ERGs for a long time? It's a lot of work. Like, what fuels you to do that? And for me, it actually was a story that happened to me. I graduated grad school. I went to work at HP. I was there in my first week. I mean, what an innocent. I had no idea what I was doing. And my manager's like, hey, come over. You're going to this event with me. So we went to this event, and it was an event for high school kids, Latinos, to try to get them to know, like, hey, STEM is a possibility. You too are good at math, and you could do that. And he's like, don't get in trouble. Don't say anything. Just stay over there, right? Because I had been there 5 minutes. So I'm like, okay, I'm just going to sit here and not do anything. And
smile and be pretty.
Let's hope so. Anyway, so basically I was there and not doing anything. And this young girl came to talk to me, and she spoke Spanish, of course. So we're chatting, we're chatting it up, having a great time. And back to the trust thing, she starts telling me her life story. This is in the Bay Area. And so she then tells me, she's like, so, I was asked, my high school counselor was telling me that I should consider applying to colleges. And I'm like, yeah, that's a great idea. You definitely should. There's so much you can do, da-da-da. And then she's like, well, she encouraged me to apply to this called MIT. And I'm like, MIT? I've never heard of MIT. I had no idea what she was talking about. So then she's like, but my family wants me to go do, my mom is thinking maybe I would be better off helping them in the car wash because they had like a car, that's where they worked in the car wash. So what do you think? And I just remember thinking, like, how's that a question? Of course you should go to college. And I felt so bad in retrospect because what an ignorant, like I didn't realize what she was really asking. I just had so little thought in my reply. And I'm like, yeah, you should go to college. And then later it came to me like 20 minutes later, I went to her, I'm like, did you say MIT? She's like, MIT. I'm like, in Massachusetts. She's like, yeah. I'm like, yeah, that's MIT. You should definitely go to MIT. And so if your counselor thinks you should go to MIT, you should definitely go to MIT. And she's like, is it a good school? I'm like, yeah. It's a really good school. You should go. And again, but I didn't have a lot of thought about what else I was breaking in her family or her mental model or her challenges. I was just like, easy. Chocolate ice cream. I like it better than vanilla ice cream. And I just felt so bad saying that. Many years later, I was actually at work and I got this letter, and it was from this girl who had found me and sent me a letter and said, I just want you to know I graduated from MIT. No, and I was like, I thought about that moment. I'm like, I went there by chance. I had no clue what I was doing. I wasn't intentional. Like, I literally stumbled across this girl, right? And had no interest in understanding her situation. I just spoke without thinking, which I felt really bad about. And it was still a good outcome. So imagine if I put any points of intention, if I put any energy units of intention, what you could do. And I think that is the inspirational thing that you need to, these kids need to know that it's possible. And so that's one of the big reasons for me. And I think that's one of the big challenges we have. I think for Latinas, the other big challenge, to be honest, is when they start getting to I'm getting married, or I'm thinking about getting married, or I'm thinking about having kids. I've had so many one-on-ones with super talented young female Latinas. There was one that she's like, I'm really worried, if I get married and I have kids, and then, what is, it seems really overwhelming, and what is after that, and, can I be successful and have kids? And, that's a tough transition, let's be honest. It's a tough transition. And then I remember asking her, I'm like, oh, are you expecting? She's like, oh, no, I don't even have a boyfriend. But I'm just planning to make sure, And so they plan so far ahead, and they want to meet their family's expectations. And I think having family for them is such a big part of that I see a huge loss in the pipeline there, because what they see is the really tough part. They don't see what door they're closing 15 years from now or 20 years from now. They just see the immediate window today. And so I think educating on that piece also is a really important one to do.
And how are you doing that?
I try to do that through our ERG. So we are, my co-sponsor and I basically are doing a lot of programming on specific topics that we think where we see the leaks. So we're just trying to like plug programming where we see these leaks that will at least will allow an education and a choice versus just not knowing. And so we have converted our ERG from, a fun community thing to, work and skill building. We also try to interject some of the fun, but we're trying really hard to create skills, not just this community where you can go complain, but more so let's give you skills, especially where we see these leaks. So.
I'm going to do a little plug for our social media channel because you just said something that reminded me of questions I had before I went to HBS, which is like somebody not knowing what MIT is.
Yeah.
For you, it's obvious. How can somebody not know?
Right.
But
they don't know.
It's not obvious. They don't know. And if you are in a family that maybe you're the first person going to college, how do you know if this is a good school or it's not a good school?
And it's far away from home.
It's far away from home.
Yeah.
I didn't know which schools were good, which schools were not good. And we are actually now asking or like opening the door to our audience to ask us those type of questions on social media, because one of the barriers that we see is the weak networks that we have.
Yeah.
And if you don't have somebody in your family that can answer those simple questions, then who do you ask? So ask us. If you have a question and you don't have somebody to ask something, ask Claudia and I. We're going to answer. Our guests are going to answer. We are your network, okay? Got it?
Right.
Let's do it.
I also want to, just like before going to the end, I want to ask about that piece where you identify the leakages and you identify the gaps. I think that the biggest gap we find is no longer at entry level or mid level. It's actually getting, like the promotion and the retention at the senior level.
Yeah.
That's why this is our response to that, to make sure that Latinas can make it and make it in half time and stay, and being able to also recognize that getting high in a company is not scary.
Yeah.
There's a lot of fear about that because you fear you're going to lose family, lose yourself, have to compromise totally who you are. And also because the higher you go, the lonelier it gets.
Yes.
How do we demystify getting to the top?
Okay, well, you asked a lot of thoughts there. I would just say, first of all, I remember when I was a director, one of my mentors, actually, not the two I spoke about, but somebody else asked me or told me, they're like, hey, I think you have a chance to go really far in your career. And as I think about you, one of the things that I think is going to be hardest for you is that it's really lonely and you're such a social bee. I'm worried. And I'm like, what do you mean lonely? And my God, they were so right. I'm so grateful this person told me that, because I really didn't realize, and it can be really lonely. So I know you want me to demystify it, but that one is a real one. I mean, it does get lonely. And I think it's because you have to make tough decisions, and the number of peers that you have sort of starts disappearing. And I remember, when I used to have a problem at work, I could call 10 people, and, then between the 10 of us, we'd figure out, sort of what the right thing to do was. When you are solely responsible for something in the company, of course you have peers outside of the company, but sometimes they're your competitors, sometimes they're really busy. It's just, you feel like you have more weight in your shoulders. And it's like a startup, right? When you have, maybe 50 or 100 people working for you and you're responsible, not just them, their families. I mean, the decisions you make really, really impact people's lives. And I think that makes it much lonelier. I do think that the myth busting can be, in many ways, the work is different, but I think what people feel is like, okay, if I'm a director and I'm doing all this work and I've become a VP or I become a C-level person, I'm just going to have to do more of this, and I don't have 1 minute in the day anymore. So like, I can't add more minutes to my day, so therefore I'm not going to go for that because that's not what I want. I think that's a total myth. I think the work is very different. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. The work is different. It's not more hours. It's just different work. And I think that's what people need to understand. And I think the other thing, in many ways, it's so hard to explain, but there's more flexibility while having less flexibility.
We've heard that, yeah.
And so because you own a lot of what your agenda is and your schedule. So you could say, look, my son is 12 and, he wants to meet really, really important. I go to this one event. I can pretty much make that happen. Whereas honestly, when I had my daughter, who's 7 years older than him, that was a lot harder because, I didn't really control my schedule as much. So I think these are some of the myths. It's just different. It's not just plus model. And you don't have to make it a plus model. I think knowing that would make people take that leap. The other thing that I have found for me that was a huge surprise, you talked about people would tell me, encourage me and things like that. But, I thought I was sort of dreaming big for a long time. I really did. And I ended up having this lunch with this headhunter guy. This was like years ago. And he was talking to me about boards and things like that. And I had never really thought about that because I have kids and I was busy and I don't want to put more on my plate. And in that, he asked me a set of questions, and I realized I don't have great answers for these. I don't think I'm dreaming big. And so I think the other thing that I would say for these women who have the opportunity to go and are sort of holding themselves back is to really question, you probably had to dream big to get to where you are, but are you still? Because I just sort of realized that I was tested, and I sort of failed that test. I fixed it, I think. But now I realize ever so often I need to sort of rethink about where I'm at to see if I'm still boiling the frog or if I'm really actually, thinking big enough about what I want to do. So those are my initial thoughts. Yeah.
Okay, so before we wrap up, you gave us a lot of good advice. Is there anything that you didn't give us that you would like to give Ana when she was 30 years old?
I think, let's see, Ana of 30. Let me think
or
about
25.
that. 30 is better.
Okay.
I love my 30s. I would just say, I had my children in my 30s, and I just feel like I was, I was scared, I think, in that time frame for a bit. And I just sort of now being on the other side of it, I just think I wish I would have known, to your point, it's not as scary as I think it is. And I think I wish I would have had that confidence, because I probably spent so many energy units that I really didn't need to spend at all. Being scared, being worried about being scared. Should I be scared? I'm not scared, but should I be scared? All these things that they were useless now. And I wish I would have just, had more conviction at that time that dreaming big is okay. And here's the thing, like, you dream big, you're going to get something. Like, I've gotten opportunities where I'm like, I can't believe this opportunity is at my doorstep and I can't do it right now. You can say no, but it's just like getting that option is so valuable, and it's so fun. It's so fun. I get to do really cool stuff that I never thought I would do. And I think everybody should deserve that chance. That's what I would think.
And I think that there's a number of Latinas, not a lot, but a number of Latinas that, like you, are making it and are willing to open the door for others, share their knowledge with others, so that not only we can all make it in half time, but also create a network of Latinas that support each other, mentor each other, open the doors and share the access code. So I am very hopeful that we might be the last generation, really.
I hope so. I'm very hopeful. My daughter's 19, and I look at that generation, I'm super hopeful. And I think we all probably feel this way, but nothing more rewarding than seeing somebody you've mentored and you've sponsored be successful. It just, like, the work I do at Google in that sense is one of my most rewarding. It just makes me so happy, and it's just so fun because you feel like you can, with very little investment, sort of change people's arcs of their life. So that's just so rewarding, and I love doing it.
And we love having you here. And
Thank
we've
you.
heard so many great pieces, and some similar, very similar. We're coming to a decalogue, a playbook, a real playbook of what it is. Like, how can you make it as a la Latina, like Latino style, and lead and succeed being your authentic self. So who else shall we have in this podcast that is going to give us another wave of wisdom?
I was super into Yvette Marino, I think is her name. She was the producer for Encanto. I love that movie. Have you guys seen it?
Yeah.
Oh my God, it's adorable. I love that movie, Encanto. And I was super impressed to learn that she was the producer. I don't know her personally, so if you guys get her here, let me know. I'll fly into New York. We'll hang out. I just love that movie. I thought, it's about magic. It has so many cultural moments of, Latin America, so many stories. I just thought it was delightful. And I remember watching it and thinking, wow, they really just captured it. And then to realize that the producer was, from, a Latina was just amazing. So I would love to hear from her. I'm sure you guys will too. And
We'll reach out to her.
yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah,
we
do
cannot
it.
be more grateful for today.
Yeah, this
Oh,
was great.
thank you. It's so
Learned a
fun.
lot.
I really appreciate you guys having me here. And, it's really a pleasure. So thank you so much.
And for everybody, give it to Ana Corrales, leading and helping us to lead a la Latina.